The maestro left us one bar of music unfinished, and I am the woman who had to decide what to do with the silence where the rest of it should have been. My name is Della Roan, and for 19 years I led the cellos of the Crown Hall Orchestra, 3 feet to the conductor's left, close enough to watch his hands and closer than anyone to the place where the sound was made. I tell you that so you understand I am not a romantic about music. I am a working musician. I count rests. I mark my part in pencil. I have played through grief and through fevers, and through a flooded pit with water rising over my shoes, because the audience paid for a concert and a professional gives them one. So when I say that the night we played for the dead maestro was the most disciplined thing I have ever witnessed, you should know the witness is hard to move. It was not the orchestra that disciplined that night. It was a single soldier who never played a note. Maestro Aldous Wren had conducted that hall for 41 years. He was not a king, and he was not a general. He was a small round man with white hair like dandelion seed, and a way of lifting his left hand, palm up, that made 800 strangers hold their breath at once. The whole kingdom of Haldane knew his face from the festival broadcasts, knew his music from weddings and funerals, and the long winter concerts that the Crown gave free to the city every year. Children who could not name the Lord Steward could hum the maestro's Evening Over the Weir. When he died in the spring, quietly in his sleep, in the small house behind the conservatory, the city went strange and soft for 3 days, the way a house goes when a grandfather is gone from it. The Crown declared a concert of remembrance. One night, the Crown Hall, where he had stood so many thousand times, the orchestra he had built, and because he had served the royal house all his life and had been made an honorary master of the king's music, a guard of honor would stand the night through beside his place. That is where the soldier comes in. But I am getting ahead of the rest he was made of, and the maestro taught me never to rush a slow movement. The plan was simple and it was wrong, and I am the one who broke it. The orchestra would play the program the maestro loved best, ending with the long, climbing final movement of his own weir. His podium would stand empty. His baton, a plain thing, beechwood worn pale where his thumb had ridden it for 30 years, would lie across the closed score on the music stand, exactly where he left it the last night he conducted. The honor guard would flank the podium. And at the end, when the music stopped, we would all simply rise and the lights would fall, and the city would go home to mourn. I hated it. I sat through 3 rehearsals hating it without being able to say why. It was correct. It was tasteful. It was everything a state occasion is supposed to be, and it had no more soul in it than a folded flag in a drawer. The maestro had spent 41 years teaching this hall that music is not the notes. It is the human being who chooses, in the half-second before the downbeat, to give everything he has. The plan gave the city his absence, beautifully arranged. It did not give them the man. I said as much to the master of ceremonies, a kind, harried official named Corliss who was trying to please a palace and a grieving city at once, and he spread his hands and told me the program was approved and the protocol was set and there was, regrettably, nothing to be done. The honor guard would do its duty. The orchestra would do its duty. Everyone would do their duty, and it would be very moving, and please, Madame Roan, would I take my seat? I took my seat, and that was where I first looked, really looked at the soldier who would stand the watch over my dead teacher's place. There were 6 of them in the honor party, but one stood at the podium itself, at the maestro's right hand, the post of honor. He was a tall man in the full dress of the KingsGuard, the deep red wool tunic, the brass buttons catching the worklights, the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, a single row of medals, the rifle grounded at his side with his white-gloved hand resting on the muzzle. His chin-strap cut a hard line under his jaw. His eyes were forward and level and fixed on nothing, the way the eyes of those men are, as though he were looking at something the rest of us could not see. I confess I resented him a little that first afternoon. He seemed to me another piece of the cold, correct machinery, a decoration, a tall red exclamation mark beside the empty podium, there to make the occasion grand. I am ashamed of that now. I did not yet know what I know now, which is that the man inside the stillness was the one person in that hall who understood exactly what the maestro had understood about giving everything and showing nothing. His name, I would learn, was Sergeant Edric Vane, but that night he had no name. He was the watch. We rehearsed the afternoon of the concert with him standing there, and I will tell you the thing that turned me. Orchestras are not reverent places. We are tired, underpaid craftspeople, and at rehearsal we talk, we complain, we eat boiled sweets, we make the jokes that working people make to get through a long day. The second oboe dropped a reed and swore. The brass laughed at something. A stand collapsed with a clatter, and the percussionist said a word the broadcast would never have allowed. Ordinary. Human. And through all of it, 3 feet from the podium, the soldier did not move. Not a flicker, not an eyebrow. He stood over the maestro's beechwood baton, as though he were standing over something that mattered more than all our noise. And somewhere in the 3rd hour of that rehearsal, the noise began, of its own accord, to quiet around him. It was not that anyone told us to be still. It was that a man was being still so completely, so purposefully, in the place where our teacher used to stand, that our own restlessness began to feel like bad manners. By the end of the rehearsal, the hall was silent between the runs. The brass had stopped laughing. The percussionist had put away the boiled sweets. 800 years of military discipline had walked into a room full of artists and taught us, without a word, how to behave in the presence of the dead. I went to him at the break. I should not have. One does not chatter at the KingsGuard on duty, and I knew it, but I was a 50-year-old woman who had just lost her teacher, and I was past caring about protocol. I stood in front of him at a respectful distance, and I said quietly, "Did you ever hear him conduct?" He did not answer. Of course he did not. His eyes stayed forward. He was on duty, and his duty was silence, and I felt the foolishness rise hot in my face, and I turned to go. And his eyes moved. Only his eyes. They came down a half-inch and met mine for the space of a single breath, and in that look there was an answer so plain that I have never doubted it since. Yes, I heard him. And then his eyes went level and forward again, and he was the watch once more. And I walked back to my chair with my heart going like a girl's, because a man who was not allowed to speak had just told me, with the only thing he had, that my teacher had reached even him. I did not know yet what that one-heard concert would come to mean. I only knew, walking back to my cello, that I had been wrong about the cold red machinery. There was a man in there, and the man had loved the music too. The hall filled at 7. 840 seats, and not one of them empty, and 1,000 more standing in the side aisles in the gallery, and out in the marble lobby where they had set loudspeakers so the overflow could hear. They had come in their good coats. They had come with their children, the small ones in their stiff collars, the way you bring a child to a thing you want them to remember being at. The Lord Steward was there in the royal box, and behind him a quiet row of the household, and somewhere up there too, I was told, a member of the royal family who had asked that no announcement be made of it. The maestro would not have wanted the night to be about a crown. He would have wanted it to be about him, which is to say about the music, which is to say about all of us. That was the maestro all over, the biggest ego in the kingdom, hidden inside the most generous heart, and you could not find the seam between them. The lights went down. The orchestra walked on in single file, no applause asked for and none given, only the long-held breath of 1,000 people. We took our places around the empty podium. The conductor's chair stayed empty. We would play the first half led by the concertmaster's bow, and our own 41 years of knowing exactly how the maestro wanted it. And the honor guard marched on. You have perhaps seen the changing of the guard, the slow ceremonial march, the crash of the heel, the precision of it. Imagine that done in a silent concert hall, in near dark. 6 men in red and black moving as one machine down the side aisle and up onto the stage. and the only sound their boots striking the boards in a rhythm so exact it might have been a metronome. The city had come to hear music, and the first music they heard was the heartbeat of marching men. Sergeant Vane took the post of honor at the podium's right hand. The other 5 took their stations. They grounded their rifles as one. And then they stopped, and the stopping was its own kind of sound, the sudden absolute end of motion, and the hall was so still you could hear the gas hiss faintly in the old footlights they had lit, just for tonight, the way the lights had been in the Maestro's first years. We began to play. I will not pretend to describe the music to you in a way that would mean anything. You were not there, and music does not survive being put into words. If it did, we would not need the music. I will only tell you that we played for our teacher as we had never played for any living soul, and that the empty podium in front of us was not empty at all, because every one of us was watching the place where his hands used to be, and conducting ourselves and conducting each other, the way he had spent his life teaching us to do when he was gone. He had told us, near the end, in the way old men tell you things they suspect are last things. A conductor's whole job is to become unnecessary. If I have done mine, you will not need me. You will need each other. We had laughed at him. We were not laughing now. We needed each other, and we found each other, and the music held. And through all of it, the soldier stood the watch. I could see him from my chair, 3 feet away in the spill of the footlights. I watched him through the slow movements when the hall wept openly, when grown men in the front rows put their faces in their hands, and the small children looked up at their weeping parents in wonder. I watched him through the great climbing passages when the whole orchestra rose like a tide and the sound filled the painted ceiling. And he did not move. The bearskin did not shift. The white glove on the rifle did not flex. His eyes stayed forward and level on the dark of the back wall. But I am a musician, and I have spent my life reading the smallest signs of feeling in a held body, in a held breath in the half-second before a phrase, and I will tell you what I saw because I am the only one close enough to have seen it. I saw that he was breathing with the music. Not following it, breathing with it, the long, slow breaths a singer takes, his chest rising on the swells and settling in the rests, so quietly that no one 10 feet away could ever have known. He was not enduring the concert. He was inside it. He had found in the one freedom his post allowed him, a way to play. He played with his breath, and his instrument was his own discipline, and he gave us the only thing a man on watch can give, which is his whole undivided attention, for 2 unbroken hours, to the memory of a man he had heard conduct once and never forgotten. I thought, watching him, the maestro would have loved you. You give everything and show nothing. That was the whole of his art. We came at last to the final movement, the long climbing evening over the weir, the piece every soul in that hall could have hummed in their sleep, the piece the maestro had written as a young man and revised all his life and could never quite leave alone. It builds. It is built to build. It starts in the low strings in my own cellos, a slow figure like water moving under ice, and it gathers the violas and then the violins and then the winds and the brass, voice upon voice, until the whole orchestra is climbing together toward a single held chord at the top, a chord the maestro always took at the very edge of what the hall could hold, and this was his signature, the thing that was his alone. He would cut it off not with a crash but with a sudden, total silence. His hands frozen in the air, and he would hold that silence, hold it past the point of comfort, hold it until the whole hall ached with it, and then, only then, he would bring down one last quiet note, the note after the silence. He called it the most important note in all his music, and the hardest to play, because by then the audience had stopped listening with their ears and started listening with their hearts, and you could not hide anything in it. We climbed toward it now. The cellos under everything, the water under the ice, the violas, the violins climbing, the winds, the brass opening like a sunrise, and we reached the great chord at the top, all of us, 800 years of someone's grandmother's music pouring out of 40 instruments at the edge of what the hall could hold. And we cut it off into the silence. And the silence came down like a held breath over the whole world. This is the moment I have been telling this story to reach. And now that I am here, I find my hands are not quite steady, and I am an old woman who counts rests for a living. In the maestro's silence, in the held breath before the last note, when 840 people and 1,000 more were straining at the absolute edge of stillness, when even the children had stopped breathing, into that silence, soft as a falling leaf, came a sound that was not in any score. It came from the podium, from the post of honor. The soldier had moved. I felt the whole orchestra stiffen around me, that animal alertness when something happens that is not in the plan. My bow froze above the strings. We had one note left to play, the most important note, and the man whose entire sacred duty was not to move had moved in the holiest second of the whole night, and my first feeling, God forgive me, was a flash of pure professional fury. Not now, not in the silence, not in the maestro's silence. And then I saw what he had done, and the fury went out of me like a snuffed candle, and what came in its place I have not the words for, though I have been trying to find them ever since. He had taken his white-gloved hand off the rifle. He had reached, slowly, with a control so total it was its own kind of music, across the small space to the music stand where the beechwood baton lay across the closed score, exactly where the maestro had left it the last night of his life. And he had picked it up. He held it the way you hold a thing that is not yours, the way you hold a sleeping child you have been asked to carry. And in the maestro's silence, in the held breath before the last note, the soldier lifted the maestro's baton and brought it down. The downbeat, the cue for the last note, the maestro's cue given by the maestro's hand in the maestro's place. I have led the cellos of that orchestra for 19 years. I did not decide to play. My body played. The whole orchestra played, 40 instruments as one, the last quiet note of Evening Over the Weir rising up out of the silence exactly where it was meant to rise on the cue of a soldier's hand, and it was the truest note I have ever played in my life, because none of us were playing for an audience anymore. We were playing because the maestro had asked us to. His hand had come down. We answered. That is all we have ever known how to do. The note hung in the air and faded, the way his notes always faded, into a silence that this time was the end. And the soldier, Sergeant Edric Vane, laid the beechwood baton back across the closed score, exactly where it had been, exactly as he had found it. He put his white-gloved hand back on the rifle. His eyes went forward and level on the dark of the back wall, and he was the watch again, as though nothing had happened, as though he had not just done the single most disciplined and most tender thing I have witnessed in 50 years of standing close to the place where music is made. For a moment the hall did not move at all. 1,000 people and not one sound. I think we were all afraid that if we breathed, the moment would prove to have been a thing we imagined. Then somewhere up in the gallery one person began to weep aloud, the helpless, undignified weeping you cannot stop, and it was permission, and the whole hall broke. Not into applause that came, but it came later, and it does not belong in this part of the telling. First it broke into grief. 840 people in their good coats, and 1,000 more standing, wept together in the dark for a small round man with dandelion hair, who had spent 41 years teaching them that music is the most generous thing a human being can do, and who had just been given his last downbeat by a stranger who had heard him conduct exactly once. I want to be careful here, because what happened next is the part that the broadcasts got hold of, and the broadcasts always flatten a thing into its loudest shape. What the broadcast said was, "Soldier BREAKS protocol to conduct dead maestro's last note." And that is true, and it is nothing, because protocol is not the thing he broke and the last note is not the thing he gave. Let me tell you what I understood, sitting 3 feet away, with my dead teacher's music still ringing in the wood of my cello. He had not broken his discipline, he had completed it. A lesser man, a man who only understood rules, would have stood there through the whole concert and never moved, and we would have called it duty and it would have been correct, and the maestro's silence would have ended in an orchestra cueing itself, which is a fine thing, a brave thing, but it is not the thing the maestro built that piece to be. The piece needs a hand. The most important note in all his music is the note after the silence, and it cannot be self-given. It must be answered. That is the whole point of it, that one human being chooses in the dark to ask, and the others choose to answer. For 41 years the maestro gave that cue, and we answered, and that was the covenant. With him gone, there was no hand to ask. The Crown's tasteful plan had us cue ourselves, which is to say it had us give the last note as a statement instead of a question, and the maestro would have hated it more than I did, and I hated it from the third rehearsal. The soldier understood. I do not know how. He was not a musician. He had heard the man conduct one time, years ago, but he understood the thing that all the protocol officers and all the master of ceremonies had missed, which is that the maestro's place could not be left merely empty. Empty is not the same as kept. A post is not honored by being abandoned. It is honored by being held until the proper hand can take it up. And so a soldier whose whole life was the holding of posts had stood the watch over an empty podium, and at the one moment when the post needed a hand, he had given it a hand, not his own claim to it, but a borrowing, a stewardship, the maestro's own baton lifted by a man who knew he had no right to it and took it up anyway because the music asked, and there was no one else. He gave us the question so that we could give the answer. That is what the KingsGuard is when you finally understand it, and I did not understand it until that night. They are not statues, and they are not decoration. They are men who have made themselves into the keeping of a thing. They stand so that the thing they stand over is not alone. And when the moment comes that the thing they keep needs more than a still body, when it needs a hand, the discipline that held them motionless for 2 hours is the very thing that lets them move at exactly the right second, by exactly the right inch, and not one motion more. The maestro spent his life teaching a hall full of artists that art is discipline poured out as love. I had nodded at that 1,000 times the way you nod at a thing you think you already know. I did not know it. A soldier taught it to me, in the dark, with a borrowed baton, in the space of a single breath. But I have gotten ahead of the rest, and there is more, and the maestro taught me never to rush a slow movement. Because the soldier was not finished, and neither, it turned out, was the night. The applause, when it finally came, did not come the way applause comes. There was no first clap to start it, no rising swell. The whole hall simply rose all at once, the way a field of grain stands up when the wind turns, and they did not clap at first. They only stood, 840 people and 1,000 more, on their feet in the dark with the tears wet on their faces, facing the empty podium where the baton lay. And then, slowly, a sound began, and it was not the crack of palms. It was a low sound, a held sound, the sound a great crowd makes when it is trying to say a thing too large for a single word. It rolled up from the floor and down from the gallery, and it filled the painted ceiling, and it went on, and it was for the maestro, and it was for the music, and I watched their faces. I watched where their eyes were going. It was more and more of it for the soldier. He did not acknowledge it. Of course he did not. He stood the watch. The other 5 stood their stations. The orchestra stayed in their chairs as the great sound broke over us, and we did not bow because we had not played for applause, and it would have been a lie to take it, and besides, the applause was not truly ours. I looked up at the royal box. The Lord Steward was on his feet like all the rest, and beside him, in the shadow at the back where the household sat, a figure had risen too, the one the broadcasts were asked not to name, and I saw a gloved royal hand come up, not waving, not signaling, and rest flat against the rail of the box, the way you put your hand against the side of a thing you cannot hold, and I understood that even up there in the highest seat in the hall, the music had found its mark. When at last the sound ebbed and the people sat, the program said the concert was over. The program was wrong about a great many things that night. The lights were meant to fall, they began to. And then they stopped, half down, because the master of ceremonies, harried Corliss, who had told me there was nothing to be done, had walked out onto the side of the stage, and he was holding a piece of paper in a hand that shook, and he was looking not at the audience but at the conductor's empty podium, and I knew before he spoke that the careful, tasteful plan had finally, completely broken open, and that something true was about to come out of the crack. He did not have a speech, he had a sheet of music. He told the hall, in a voice that kept failing him and that he kept hauling back up, that the maestro had been working on a new piece in the last weeks of his life. A small thing, a quiet thing, unfinished, found on the desk in the house behind the conservatory. That the maestro had told no one its name. That it was 8 bars long and stopped in the middle of the 9th, the pen stroke trailing off the staff as though he had meant to come back to it after his nap, and had simply not woken. That the household had debated long whether to play an unfinished, unrevised fragment in so grand a hall, and had decided against it, because it was not finished, because it was not correct, because the maestro had not approved it, because, and here Corliss stopped and looked at the soldier at the podium, and I saw him decide something, because they had been afraid of the silence at the end of it. The silence where the rest of the music should have been. They had not known what to do with a piece that stops in the middle of a breath. "But I have just watched," Corliss said, and his voice came up at last and held. "I have just watched a man who is not a musician understand a thing about this music that I, who have served it for 30 years, did not understand. That an empty place is not honored by being left empty. It is honored by being kept. So if the principal cellist will permit it," and he looked at me, and I was already setting my end pin, I was already reaching for the part he held out, "we will not leave the maestro's last music in a drawer because it is unfinished. We will play it, all 8 bars, and the 9th we will leave open, and we will see what the keeping of it teaches us. I have played in that hall 4,000 times. My hands have never shaken on the strings the way they shook taking that single sheet of music from Corliss's hand. 8 bars in the maestro's own pencil, his own crabbed hand that I knew as well as my mother's. The dynamics marked the way he always marked them, and then the 9th bar beginning 3 notes, and then nothing. The pen lifting off the staff. The silence where the rest of it should have been. There was no time to copy parts for the orchestra. It did not matter. It was 8 bars of a slow line in the low strings, and I have played the maestro's hand my whole life, and I would carry it alone. A solo. My cello and the empty podium and the soldier standing the watch over both. I will tell you that I did not think I could do it, and I will tell you that I was right, and that it did not matter because I was not asked to do it alone. I played the first bar into a silence so complete it was like playing underwater. The maestro's line, slow, low, climbing the way the water climbs under the ice. The second bar. The third. I felt the whole hall lean in. I felt 800 years of grief lean in. By the 5th bar I understood what the piece was. It was the same shape as the weir, the same climb, the water under the ice, but smaller, more naked. An old man's hand returning at the very end of his life to the same question he had asked as a young man, asking it once more quietly, with nothing left to prove. By the 7th bar my throat had closed and I did not know how I would make it through the 8th. The 8th bar came. I played it. And then the 3 notes of the 9th, the last 3 notes the maestro's hand had ever written. And then the silence, the open 9th bar, the place where the music stopped. And I sat there alone with my bow on the string and nowhere to take it, in the silence where the rest of the maestro's life should have been. And I felt the whole hall holding its breath in the dark, waiting, the way you wait at a bedside, and I had no more music to give them, because there was no more music, because the man who would have written it was gone, and there was nothing where the answer should have been. And the soldier moved. The second time I was watching for it, and still it stopped my heart. His white-gloved hand left the rifle. He did not reach for the baton this time, that was the maestro's, and it had already given its last cue, and he knew, he understood the difference, he understood everything. Instead he turned by a quarter, the smallest turn, the kind of turn those men make when they present arms, his boots scraping the boards once, and he faced the empty podium fully for the first time all night. And he brought his white-gloved right hand up, slowly with that total control, to the brim of the bearskin. He saluted the empty place. He held it. He held the salute over the maestro's empty podium in the silence of the open ninth bar, and he held it past the point of comfort, the way the maestro held his silences, until the whole hall ached with it, and I understood, sitting there with my dead bow on the string, that he was finishing the music, not with a note. The note was not his to write, no one's. The maestro had taken the rest of it with him, and that was the truth of the piece, that was what it was about, that was why it stopped in the middle of a breath. There was no answer to play. There was only the keeping of the silence where the answer should have been. And a soldier knew, as a musician could never have known, that some silences are not failures of music. Some silences are the music. You do not fill them. You stand the watch over them. You hold your salute, and you do not let the empty place be alone, and you keep it with your whole disciplined body for as long as the keeping is needed. The other 5 guards turned as one, their boots cracking the boards in a single sound, and they saluted too. 6 white gloves at 6 bearskin brims, over an empty podium, in a silence with no last note in it. And then I did the only thing left to do, the only thing the maestro would have wanted, the thing his whole art had been pointing at for 41 years. I lifted my bow off the string. I did not play the ninth bar. I let it stay open. I joined the soldiers in the only way a musician can join a silence, which is by choosing with everything in you not to break it. And the orchestra behind me understood. I heard the whole orchestra understand, heard 40 professionals decide at once not to reach for their instruments. And the silence held, kept by 6 soldiers and 40 musicians and 1,000 strangers, all of us standing the watch together over the empty place where a great heart used to beat. We held it. We held it the way he taught us to hold his silences, past comfort, past bearing, until it stopped being grief and became something else, something I can only call peace, the peace that comes when you have finally given a thing its full due and there is nothing more that honor requires of you. And then, when the silence had been kept long enough, the soldier brought his hand down from the salute slowly and laid it back on the rifle and faced forward and was the watch again. And the lights fell. In the dark, no one moved for a long time. Then they went home. They went home the way you walk home from a thing that has changed you slowly, not talking, holding each other's arms on the marble steps. The small children went home asleep on their father's shoulders, and one day they will tell their own children that they were there, the night the soldier finished the maestro's music by not playing a note. I stayed. The orchestra filed off, and I stayed in my chair with my cold cello until the hall was empty, and the work lights came up harsh and ordinary, and the magic was packed away with the chairs, and it was just a big old room again that smelled of dust and rosin. The honor guard was relieved at last, the watch handed to the next men in the proper way, and Sergeant Vane came down off the stage, and I was waiting for him, because I am a 50-year-old woman who had just been taught the thing her teacher spent his whole life trying to teach her, and I was not going to let the man walk out of my life without telling him so. He stopped when he saw me. Off duty now in the harsh light, he was just a tired man in a heavy red coat, younger than I'd thought, with kind, exhausted eyes. He came to attention out of habit and then made himself stand easy, awkward with it, the way those men are when the watch is over and they have to be people again. I asked him the question I had asked him at the rehearsal, the one he could not answer then. When did you hear him conduct? And this time he could answer, and he did, and his voice was low and rough, a voice that did not get much use. 11 years ago, he said, the free winter concert. I just lost my brother, he was a soldier too, and I went because it was free and warm and I had nowhere I wanted to be. I didn't know anything about music. He looked at the empty stage. He played the weir, And he held that silence before the last note the way he does, and I thought I would come apart. I thought, that's it, that's exactly it, that's the silence after you lose someone, the one nobody knows what to do with. And then he brought down the last note, and it was all right. He showed me it could be all right. He stopped. His jaw worked. I never forgot it. I've stood a lot of posts since. I never wanted any of them like I wanted this one. I had to ask him, how did you know? About the cue, about the salute. You're not a musician. How did you know what the music needed? He thought about it for a long moment, an honest man finding the true answer instead of the easy one. I didn't know it was the music, he said finally. I knew it was a post. The podium was his post. He'd stood it 41 years and now he couldn't, and they had me there to keep it. He turned the bearskin slowly in his hands. When the music stopped before that last note, I could feel it, the whole room reaching for a hand that wasn't there. A post with no one to hold it. And the first rule, the only rule, the thing they make you so it's deeper than thinking, you don't leave a post unheld. If the man can't stand it, you stand it for him until the watch is properly done. So I took up his baton because that was the tool of his post, the way my rifle's the tool of mine, and I held the post the way he'd have held it. That's all. I just stood his watch. He looked at me, almost apologizing. I'm sorry if I broke up your concert. I told him no. I told him he had not broken the concert. He had finished it. He had given my teacher the one thing the whole grand, careful occasion had failed to give him, which was a hand. I told him that the Maestro had spent 41 years teaching us that music is discipline poured out as love, and that I had nodded at it 1,000 times and never understood it until I watched a soldier prove it with a borrowed baton and a held salute. I told him the last bar of the Maestro's last music would stay open forever now, unfinished, the way he left it, and that we would never fill it, because a soldier had taught us that the keeping of the silence is the truest answer there is. He listened to all of it with his exhausted, kind eyes, and when I was done, he was quiet for a while, and then he said the thing I have carried with me every day since, the thing I think about every time I take my place 3 feet to the left of a living conductor and watch his hands and wait, with all my discipline, for the half-second before the downbeat when a human being chooses to give everything he has. He taught the whole kingdom how to listen, the soldier said. I just made sure somebody was still standing his post when he couldn't. He put the bearskin back on, and he was the watch again, even off duty, even in the harsh light. That's not breaking protocol, ma'am. That's the whole of it. You hold the line so the thing behind it is never alone. The Maestro held his line so none of you would ever have to be alone with a silence again. I just held mine. He saluted me, a small thing, a kindness, one keeper of a hard discipline to another, and he turned and walked out of the empty hall, his boots striking the boards in that exact, eternal rhythm, the heartbeat of marching men, fading away down the corridor until there was only the dust and the rosin and the open 9th bar hanging in the air where I would always be able to hear it. We never finished the Maestro's last piece. The household offered later to commission a composer to complete it, and the orchestra voted, and the vote was not even close. We play it every year now on the anniversary, exactly as he left it. 8 bars and 3 notes and then the open silence. And into that silence the honor guard comes and salutes the empty podium where his baton still lies, and we all stand the watch over the place where the rest of the music should have been, and we keep it, and we do not fill it, and somehow the keeping of it is more full than any ending a living hand could have written. People ask me sometimes what the Maestro's greatest work was. They expect me to name the Weir, or one of the great symphonies, or the festival pieces the whole kingdom can hum. I tell them his greatest work was an unfinished one, 8 bars long. It stops in the middle of a breath, and it has no last note, and it never will, and a soldier in a red coat showed an entire hall full of grieving strangers that the silence where the music ends is not the place where the love runs out. It is the place where the keeping begins. You stand your post. You hold your line. You do not let the empty place be alone. That was the last note for the maestro. There was no note in it at all. It was a man at attention with his hand at his brow, holding a silence over an empty podium, refusing, with the whole iron weight of his discipline and the whole quiet weight of his love, to let his teacher stand his final watch alone. I count rests for a living. I have never in my life heard a silence so full.